Point spreads are available for the remaining games on the Iowa Hawkeye football schedule. We'll break that down. How many games are the Hawkeyes favored in going forward? Yesterday, it was positive. We gave you 5 reasons why Iowa can beat Michigan. Today, we go the other direction. 5 reasons that Iowa's going to get blown out by the Wolverines. We'll also talk about the offensive line, the struggles we've seen. George Barnett, the offensive line coach, he spoke yesterday. All coming up on today's Locked On Hawkeyes podcast.
Are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in once again to the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. I'm Trent Condon. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen each and every day, with you daily throughout the course of the week. And also coming up, we'll have some instant reaction podcasts for you, though might be a little bit later, as I'll be at Kinnick Stadium as a fan, not as a media member, coming up on Saturday. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline, and a big thank you to BetOnline. They have you covered this football season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So we got a lot to get into here today. We're going to kick things off talking about point spreads. And in fact, we're going to talk about BetOnline right there and the numbers that are out there. So first of all, a look at the rest of the season. As we know right now, as we talk, Iowa is 11, some 11 and a half starting to pop. Point underdog against Michigan coming up this week. But a sports book that is available here in the state of Iowa, Elite Sportsbook, it's got properties all across the state. I think 3 different locations. They have point spreads out for every remaining game for the Hawkeyes this season. So I tweeted these out earlier today. You can check them out. Just find my Twitter account at Trent Condon as where you can find that. Give me a follow there, or of course at Locked On Iowa. And you can also follow everything that we have on that side of things. But just taking a look at those numbers, and a couple surprising numbers as we go through this. So this week, as mentioned, they are an underdog against Michigan. We knew that was going to be the case. One interesting angle about this game this weekend, in comparison to the opening lines that came out this summer, Michigan was anywhere between a 3 to 5 point favorite in the look ahead lines, the games of the year lines that came out throughout the course of the summer. My buddy Chris Andrews out of the South Point, he always puts those out every year. A few other places had them out throughout the course of this season. So those were where the look ahead lines were this summer. Well, that closed up right as the season began, and then we wait for the lines. But one thing that Elite Sportsbook is doing a little bit different, and they did this a couple of years back as well, as they continue to evolve throughout the course of the season, and I think gives you some value if you are a bettor, an opportunity to get ahead of the lines, or if you like a number before it actually comes out. The other thing that it does, it also gives you a middling opportunity. And if you're new to the gambling space, what a middle is. Let's say you did bet this summer and you bet Iowa, or let's just say you bet Michigan this summer. You saw that line. Look, we know 42-3 last year, the Big Ten championship game. You saw the Wolverines for a 4-point favorite. You said, you know what, I'm going to lay it. I'm going to lay Michigan -4 in that opening game. Well, now you come back on the other side with the line this week of 11. And if Michigan wins this game by 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 points, that huge middle that you have, you win both sides of your bet. So that's what middling is. You don't get that many opportunities. This is what you normally have to do to get these big lines in the summer if you're going to do and try to play a middling game at this kind of fashion. But you'll see it if a point spread's right around a key number, a 3, a 7, and people trying to middle that number and hoping that there's going to be some kind of sway, betting on things right when they come out. Circa's always the first that comes out here in the state of Iowa. That's available on Sunday afternoon with the college point spread. So just something to look at. Gambling. I know a lot of people out there maybe new to the gambling space. For me, I've been doing it for a long time. Not successfully, but we've been doing it for a long time. I love it. And that's a big part of certainly the conversations that I like to have here with you guys on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, and also on my radio show that you can catch on KXNO, Miller and Condon, from 10 to noon each and every day, 106.3 in Central Iowa, and also available on the iHeartRadio app. So back to the point spreads here, what we have the remaining season. Of course, this week, after Michigan, it's a road trip going on the road as they will take on Illinois. The Illini playing much better under Bielema. They got a huge matchup themselves this week as they'll take on Wisconsin. That'll be a road tilt for the Illini. It'll be a night game. What's the environment going to be? Probably not great. Look, it's Champaign. It's Memorial Stadium. That place hasn't been banged out in a while, but it's still a night game. As we saw with Rutgers, they sold that thing out last week. I don't know if the environment's going to matter, but I thought this point spread would tick a little bit higher. I thought Iowa, in fact, would be favored by a little bit more in this game. Iowa currently just a 2-point favorite in the matchup at Illinois. Then it's a bye week before they get Ohio State. Now, this point spread was also part of those games of the year that came out this summer. One of the big differences, though, that we've seen on this course is this one has stayed the same. In comparison to the Michigan line, this one has stayed very close to what it is currently at Elite Sportsbook. 21.5 is the number. That's basically what the look ahead was. A lot of 21s that were out there this summer. So Iowa 3-touchdown underdog. And, I thought that one also might have ticked a little bit higher. Has not been the case to this point with Iowa and Ohio State coming up in a couple of weeks. It'll be a return back home to Kinnick Stadium against Northwestern. Of course, we saw them week 0, the win over in Ireland. Looked great in that one, coming back and beating Nebraska. Since then, it has been a dumpster fire for Northwestern. But we know history, right? And history is certainly not on our side as it pertains to Northwestern. The number is 18.5. That's right. Iowa favored by 18.5. With this offense, should they be favored against anybody in the Big Ten by 18.5? I certainly don't think so. In fact, this is one that I jumped aboard right away. When I saw these point spreads, I jumped on Northwestern plus the 18.5. 3 more games to go. Next up is a road tilt out to Purdue. Iowa slight underdog here too. Again, history certainly with Jeff Brom and company not on the side. And this is the one team that Phil Parker has really struggled with trying to figure things out. A year ago, it was wide receiver David Bell just going nuts in that game, and Iowa has not been able to figure out that Purdue passing scheme, a team that hasn't run the ball very well, though they did 2 years ago in the 2020 game, the first game of the season for the Hawkeyes that year. So that one was a surprise, too. I thought Purdue would be favored a little bit more. Now, we also have to wait Aiden McConnell and what he's going to be health-wise. Doesn't look like he's going to be available to go this week against Minnesota. Didn't play last week, got injured in the game against Florida Atlantic, where Purdue had to hold on and survive that one. Maybe that has something to do with the point spread, just a little bit surprised, but doesn't matter who the signal caller is. Purdue certainly has Iowa's number in the Brom era. After that, another team that Iowa struggles with, it'll be Wisconsin coming to town. Now, the Badgers have their own set of issues. Last week, they were blown out by Ohio State, and not just getting blown out. You can anticipate something like that can happen against the Buckeyes, but that defense, guys running free all over the place. It was an ugly, ugly day for the Badgers and trying to find a way to slow down Ohio State. They had no answer. Still, Iowa's had their own struggles against the Badgers. As we know, 1.5 the number. Wisconsin is favored at Kinnick Stadium. 2 more games to go. Next is a road trip, and this has been one of the biggest swings before the season at the South Point. This was a game that was out there. Iowa was favored by 6 before the season. Now, Minnesota is favored by 7 in the game that'll be played up at TCF Bank. We've seen the Gophers have looked incredible to this point in the season. They have been demolishing people up and down the field, and that performance last week against Michigan State, that deserved a wow. And the other part, as we've seen Minnesota and even some of their better teams under Phil Fleck, they've had struggles early in the year. Of course, last year turned out to be a pretty good team. Beat, obviously, Wisconsin that last game of the year and helped Iowa get into the Big Ten championship game. But that's a team a year ago that lost to a bad Bowling Green team, a bad back team. They've had struggles in the past against South Dakota State, a couple other games in the non-conference. That's not normally what we see from Minnesota, them coming out of the gates this strong. It has been different this year. Schedule hasn't been difficult. Michigan State, we'll see if they're a paper tiger. 2 bad losses in a row from Sparty certainly makes that a little bit more of a question mark. Still, the clear-cut favorite right now in the West is Minnesota and Iowa, a 7-point dog in that one. And then wraps up with Black Friday. Back home as it'll be Nebraska in town. Iowa, just a 4-point favorite in this game. Also a little bit of a surprise. But you add it all up, and if you're just going strictly by the point spread and which side wins, that lines up for a 6-6 season for Iowa. How disappointing would that be? Well, there's a big one on tap this week. Yesterday, here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, myself and Biz, well, it was Biz and Stat Boy. They gave you 5 reasons why Iowa can pull the upset. Today, we go the other direction. 5 reasons that Iowa's going to get blown out in this game by the Wolverines. We'll do that as we continue here in a moment. This is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Well, you hear me talking about point spreads and a place to go to help you out with point spreads and a whole lot more is BetOnline, your number one source for football betting information this season. You can find all the latest player developments, injuries, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game out there. As always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting, up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, not just college football, not just the NFL, Major League Baseball as we go into the final week of the regular season, the playoffs right around the corner. You're into MMA, boxing, golf, whatever it is, they have you covered at Bet Online. Go to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet Online, where the game starts. We'll make our picks here later in the week, and we will get into everything that is happening on that front. But let's get back into the podcast here today. I'm again Trent Condon with you. Glad to have you aboard with us, a solo edition of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. So yesterday it was 5 reasons why Iowa was going to pull the upset, or not even why they can. Like, had a lot of Michigan fans in the mentions, a lot of people on YouTube making their comments. If you're on YouTube right now, hey, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. It helps us out and goes a long way into continuing to help us with the Locked On Network and Locked On Hawkeyes. Just hit subscribe, even if you're not coming back each and every day, really helps us out and continue to grow those numbers. Our goal was to get to 1,000 subscribers by the time we got to the Michigan game. Hey, Hawkeye fans, you showed up and helped us do that. In fact, over 1,100 now. Hey, let's see if we can get to 1,200. How about that before things kick off? And a big thank you to everybody that has gone in that fashion. We've had a lot of fun here, breaking things down, even some of the frustrations and the disappointments. And if you're a Hawkeye fan that doesn't want to hear negativity, doesn't want to hear that side, this is not going to be the segment for you. Look, fast forward to the end. We got some more nuggets, some news and notes for the press conferences. We'll get into that. This is probably not the time for you right now if you're somebody that I can't hear some negatives about your team. Me as a fan, and that's what I am. Though, yes, I'm on the radio. Yes, I do a podcast. I guess I'm part of the media in some form or fashion. Ultimately, I'm like you, I'm a fan. I grew up in this state. I grew up in the 80s, and what a big deal Iowa basketball and Iowa football was. Ultimately, I love going to games, and I love being there, and I don't do it and go sit in the press box. No, I go and I sit in the stands with you. That's what I am. I'm a fan, but I'm also kind of a jaded fan. I'm a positive guy in my real life. I optimistic, positivity all over the place. That's who I am. But as it pertains to my sports teams, a little scar tissue is built up throughout the years. I'm a Twins fan. Well, when I was 7 and 87 and 11 and 91, those are great. Well, we're talking about 30 years ago from 1991, now 31 years, and another disappointing season for Minnesota. Well, you see my Timberwolves hat on today. Not a whole lot of success there. Maybe trending in a positive direction. Didn't like the Rudy Gobert trade, but that aside, we're not here to talk about the Timberwolves. I'm also a Bears fan. Hey, I was in kindergarten in 85. I jumped on the bandwagon like the Bears, and since 85, it has been certainly a downturn for me. So that has led to maybe my jaded nature as a sports fan. Of course, the Hawkeyes. For all the greats that we've had, all the highs, there's also the lows, and I think we all know about them. So that's where I come a little bit more as a perspective as a fan. So we're going to go the other direction, not exactly poking holes in what Jace brought up with us yesterday, along with Stat Boy, but 5 reasons why I was going to get blown out. Not just lose this game, but maybe in a similar fashion to what we saw last December in the Big Ten championship game. We start number 1. The offense is still last in the country. This is still the worst offense in the country, and it's not even close. They're still over 20 yards behind the 130th team as Iowa sits at 131 out of 131. That's New Mexico State, one of the worst programs in the country year after year. 232 yards per game. I mean, it's laughable. They haven't played Murder's Row here. The schedule has not been that difficult. They haven't played any vaunted defenses to this place, and yet this offense is struggling at this level. 115th at 100 yards per game rushing and 124th in the country and passing offense per game at 131 yards per contest, averaging just 17 points. And remember, the defense has set up a whole lot of those points. The short field against Iowa State in the first touchdown of the season. 2 safeties against South Dakota State. Even the field goal that they got was set up by the defense. And then, of course, what we saw even against teams, like Nevada. Last week, the defense outscoring the offense. 14 points from the defense on 2 touchdowns, 13 from the offense. That's what we're getting at. This is still a bad offense. And it doesn't matter the way that you slice it and dice it. This is a really, really bad offense. And, we've been maybe treating Spencer Petras now with kid gloves. Look, I absolutely murdered him the first couple of weeks. It was brutal, and there's no way about it. You take that loss to Iowa State, a game that, frankly, with a competent quarterback, Iowa shouldn't have lost, with a competent running game, with a competent wide receiver group, but they did. And we can talk about the reasons, and we've done all that before, but ultimately, it comes back to the most important position in football. Petras has been better the last 2 weeks, but let's slow down. Nevada was brutal. That was an awful football team, and he looked okay in that one. He also had wide receivers. Last week, he had one catch out of his wide receivers, only 3 targets. Laporte and Lachey, they got involved a little bit in the passing game, but outside of that, yes, he graded highly by Pro Football Focus. But if you watch that game, it's oh boy, he's figured it out. Let's slow down. Here's this though from Spencer Petras, and a reason why Iowa can get blown out. Spencer Petras has been a better quarterback on the road than he's been at home. Throughout his career, Spencer Petras has thrown 11 touchdown passes in Kinnick Stadium now against 12 interceptions. That number is completely different on the road. This game's going to be in Kinnick, and he has not been the same quarterback. He has not been as good of a quarterback when he has played at home as he has on the road. So that's number one, the offense, right? Brian Ferentz stinks as a play caller. We've gone on 5 years now of the running game looking absolutely brutal under him. That's where we are. Doesn't matter what they do, what they try to do, what he tries to scheme up. 2017 performance against Ohio State. That was a long, long time ago. Special teams advantage. Well, it feels like every week Iowa has a special teams advantage, right? Number two, that special teams advantage, not as significant as it's been in most weeks. In fact, take a look at this number. Iowa right now in the country is number 17 in net punting. We know this is a lot of times Tory Taylor pitting them deep. Even if I was at midfield or at the 45-yard line of the opponent, they're still going to punt it, pin them deep. That's the way that this team is built. That's the way that they are going to play. So maybe that impacts a little bit. We know Tory Taylor is a fine, fine punter, one of the best in the country, and won the punting battle last week against an All-American. But on the other side, Michigan is number 2 in net punting so far this season. Now, the Wolverines haven't had to punt very much. The numbers are not the same as you look at the total yardage there. Not a stat that you want to be winning, but that has been the case for the Hawkeyes this season. But that special teams advantage in the punt game, at least on paper right now, doesn't show up in the same way. Iowa is also 79th in punt returns on the season. On the other side, Michigan number 24 in punt return yardage, number 52 in kick returns. So that gap that Iowa can close because of their special teams being significantly better than a lot of teams, that has not been the case, at least this season, according to the numbers here. Another thing you say, hey, if we win defense, we win special teams, maybe we have a chance. That gap is not significant. In fact, maybe you could even put a check mark on the Michigan side in a couple of those. So that's item number 2. Let's get to number 3, and that is the Michigan offense. This is a different animal than Iowa has faced this season. This is a completely different team overall, starting with the quarterback. Hunter Deckers, I think, has a nice future, but he is not J.J. McCarthy, not in terms of athleticism, not in terms of numbers this year. Deckers, we've seen throughout the season for Iowa State, he's turned it over a bunch. Think about the play that he threw into the end zone against Iowa, just not even looking and just throwing the ball up in one-on-one coverage and hoping for something to happen, and Iowa got an interception out of that. That has not been J.J. McCarthy this season. He is completing 80% of his passes, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. Not only that, how many times in the past, even under Phil Parker, have we seen Iowa really struggle with a quarterback that can run? Well, that's J.J. McCarthy. That guy can get out there. He can move. He can make plays. He's done it with his feet. He's also worked to not just tuck it and run, but extend plays down the field, getting outside the pocket, and then making plays up the field, something that Iowa has to be very cognizant about. That is a scary proposition. But it's not only that. Blake Corum, 478 yards rushing this season. Touchdowns are through the roof. Iowa's a team has 408. He's got 478 alone, and he's not alone back there, but he is an outstanding running back, and just a guy with this physicality. Looks like he got him bottom up, for a 2-yard gain, and he still squirts out and gets 4. He needs to make a first down, and he just always seems to be falling forward, and not only that, he can also make big plays. This is a physical guy. This is a guy that Iowa has to be ready for and really bottle up. That is a concern. And the other part here is, though this Iowa defense is playing at such a high level and playing great, they've been on the field a bunch. They're getting banged up, and we're already seeing that play out from the middle of things. Noah Shannon a couple of weeks ago against Nevada was only able to play 5 snaps. He comes back and plays 43 snaps, I think it was, against Rutgers, but he's been banged up. Obviously, Y.A. Black, he's still out. Another player at the defensive tackle position. You look at linebacker, Justin Jacobs, one of the most athletic players that they have on the whole roster. He's out and out for the rest of the season, as was announced. The cornerback spot has been banged up this season. Injuries are starting to pile up for this Iowa defense. And even with the depth that they have built, it's not at the same level. This Michigan team offensively is really good. And not only that, who has Iowa played at this point? These are the national numbers for the four opponents for Iowa at this point in total offense. South Dakota State, number 77. That's in the FCS level. Out of the FCS teams, they're ranked number 77. Iowa State, back to the FBS, the 76th offense in the country. Nevada, number 123, and Rutgers, number 98. And you can say, Trent, come on. They had to play the Iowa defense, and that's why those numbers are down. I agree with you. That's a point. But still, we have not seen anything close to what this Michigan offense has been. The Michigan offense, number 3, why Iowa could get blown out this weekend. Number 4, turnovers. Oh, Iowa. We're going to win this game. It's going to be because of the turnovers. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, J.J. McCarthy has not turned the football over. In fact, as an interceptor, he has not thrown an interception so far this season. Just 2 fumbles this year. Michigan, 20th in the country right now in turnover margin. Iowa is just 40th. And Iowa struggled themselves with turnovers to this point in the year. We've seen Spencer Petras and the interceptions that he has thrown this year. This is not the Spencer Petras that was just that, gonna sit back, make the right plays, and not turn it over. That is not the same guy that we've seen going back to the end of last season, or at least the back half of the season and into this year. Just 2 fumbles lost for Michigan this year. Turnovers, you think Iowa, hey, they got a big advantage there. They're going to turn it over. That has not been the case so far this season. Number 4. And finally, number 5, we talked about the history, right? Iowa has the history on their side. And we've talked about the numbers going back and what Iowa's done in their victories. The last 6 times a top 5 opponent has come into Kinnick Stadium, Iowa's won 5 of those 6 games. The only loss came on the final play of the game against Penn State back in 2017. Happened right in front of me. Got tickets right on the field. That was before the construction of the new end zone on the north side there. Got a client that hooked me up with tickets right on the field, feet on the AstroTurf. It was great. A cool environment, but it still haunts me. Just the sound of the football from Sean Clifford hitting the hands. It wasn't Sean Clifford. Who was it? It was Trace McSorley, excuse me. Trace McSorley. But the football hitting the hands of that wide receiver and just the thud as he brings it down and wins it 21-19. Just an epic football game there. Saquon Barkley was out of his mind. It looked like I was going to pull another one. But outside of that, let's look back at those wins and those other victories that Iowa's get, starting in 2008 against Penn State, and some of the circumstances that happened that led to Iowa getting the win. First, that Penn State game in 2008. Iowa comes back on a Daniel Murray kick to win it 24-23. But if you remember about that game, there are a couple of things that certainly jump out. First of all, remember being there. It was bitterly cold that day. But the first quarter, the first half of the game, Iowa was lucky to be in it. Penn State was just a lot better. They were a lot better football team, and they were showing it throughout that first half. And Iowa was pretty lucky to be in that game going into the locker room, but it was domination. But remember also what Iowa had. First of all, they had Ricky Stanzi. He makes the drive to set up the field goal late in the game, throw to DJK. Well, yeah, you had a guy like DJK also on that roster, Marvin McNutt. But Sean Green was the difference maker. 28 carries, 117 yards, 2 touchdowns. Sean Green right now is not on this roster. Unless you believe Caleb Johnson's going to be a guy. Is Iowa willing to give 28 touches to Caleb Johnson? I feel that would be a path that Iowa needs to if they're going to have a shot in this football game. You got to get your playmakers involved. And that's something you're going to see throughout the course of this exercise. The other top 5 victory came a couple years later against Michigan State. Iowa came off a tough loss. Michigan State was ranked number 5, and this was just an absolute blitzkrieg. Iowa jumped out 30-0. That was the game. You had the interception return. Micah Hyde off the Tyler Sash pitch that they ran back for a touchdown. Adam Robinson, he caught a pass from Ricky Stanzi in that one. Robinson was great in the game. Iowa just thorough domination, and Michigan State turned it over 3 different times. So that was number 2 as we go through these 5 victories. And history is not playing. And you also, you need to make some plays. Making plays, that is number 3 on our list. That was the 14-13 win, another last-second field goal for the Hawkeyes, a Michigan team that was playing incredibly well at that time. Iowa, how did they do it? They did it with a playmaker in Akram Wadley. They got him in space. They got him out wide. They give him ability to not only catch the football, but run the football and just do enough offensively. The defense also scored in that game. Got a safety in that one to keep it in it early. And that's kind of another part of this. You got to stick around if you're going to pull off that upset. 55-24. Oh, we remember it well. One of the craziest days at Kinnick Stadium. This is one that is absolutely epic when you look back upon it. It was one of the weirdest environments that I can remember. Of course, the first play of the game, you get the pick six as it was a run back for a touchdown. Just an incredible environment. The place went nuts. I was wearing the blackout uniforms. It was a madhouse at Kinnick Stadium. Also, Bosa had to leave that game as he was ejected. How much that changed the complexion, what a pass rusher he was, and Iowa's offensive line was really struggling coming into that game. I think completely changed the way things were going at that point in time and what Iowa ultimately was able to do. But they had heroic performances from Nate Stanley throwing for 5 touchdowns, including one with a guy on his legs. Akram Wadley again 20 carries, 118 yards. Hawkinson had a couple of touchdowns. Fant had a touchdown where he just beat a safety off the line and beat him for a catch in the corner of the end zone. Those were the kind of performances that they needed to pull off that upset. And then finally, it was another one against Penn State last year. That was Nico Reganey making a play late in the football game. That was the defense at least giving them a chance. Iowa has found a way, but they've always found a way because somebody stepped up offensively. Is there anybody that can do that? As I said, history isn't there. And though these were all not night games per se, these were all games that ended up being in the evening, a little bit later. 11 o'clock kickoff, we know. It is just different than even a 2:30, 3 o'clock kickoff. And of course, a night game, how electric it is. Michigan, they got to be happy about the start time. Fox will be happy too, as they get a big one that's going to get a big number if Iowa can hang around. But those are the reasons Iowa can be blown out. We go the other side after yesterday's reasons that Iowa can pull off the upset against Michigan. We'll finish things up. Some news and notes from the press conferences. George Barnett, the offensive line coach in his second year, he talked yesterday, the day before, from Kirk Ferentz. And we'll do that as we continue here in a moment. This is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Trent Condon back with you one final time here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen each and every day. Find us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and available wherever you get podcasts. Wrapping things up and a couple of nuggets that came out. We've talked here on the podcast about what we've seen from Ellsbury, the guard coming in, and how different the run game has looked. Now, he's only played in 2 games, one against Nevada, the other last week against Rutgers, hasn't played a whole lot. The reasoning I thought was interesting. Now, the thing that I like about Coach Barnett is he's not talking in cliches. He's not giving you those canned responses that we get, what we get from Kirk each and every week when he's talking in his press conference. You kind of know. I mean, you can look at a transcript from now and you can look at one from 1999, and they're going to look very, very similar. Certainly, right? As Kirk likes to say, most certainly. You're going to see pretty much the exact same thing. Coach Barnett, though, he was talking about the guys. Now, he had positive things to say about everybody, but Ellsbury's a guy. The run games just look different. He's a mauler. He's physical. He goes out there and he can make plays, and the excitement level that brings, because this running game needs to get going. If I was going to have a chance to be better than what the point spread that we talked about at the top, better than 6-6, they're going to need a whole lot more out of this running game because we know the limitations of this offense in the passing game. And though Laporta's a nice player, Nico Reganey's a nice player, they're just that. They're nice players. These are not elite playmakers. Caleb Johnson can be that guy. And I think Ellsbury can be a guy that really helps solidify the inside. Connor Colby on one side, Mason Richmond on the other. You feel good about the tackle spot and what it still can be. Guys working their way in there. George Barnett also talking about Connor Colby, who, of course, played a ton last year as a true freshman, out there for his second year, but he was a guard and now kicking back outside. And he said at times he looked like a guard trying to play tackle early in the season. And I think he's starting to round into form. The interesting part, though, about the Ellsbury one is he's also the backup center. And a reason for that is Michael Malinsky, who is a highly regarded kid coming out of high school. He had big time offers. He's a Texas guy. Florida was heavily involved. I mean, he had a lot of teams, big time programs that were after him, and he ultimately chose Iowa. But he's been dealing with injury. In fact, last season was also dealing with injury. That's led to Logan Jones, of course, being the starting center. But because they didn't also have their backup in Maluski, it became Ellsbury. That was the backup. And they didn't want to put too much on the plate. They also worried about injury. Well, I got a problem with that. I mean, worrying about an injury, I get it. Offensive linemen, they get banged up, they get hurt. That's going to happen. But to not play one of your best guards, and that's what, at least for my untrained eye, he has certainly looked at this point in time, not playing the first 2 games, not giving the snaps that I think he can help out this team a ton because he happens to be the backup center. I don't know. There's something that just doesn't sit exactly right. But a tip of the ball cap there, certainly, to hearing from Coach Barnett and what he had to say in a positive direction. Really like that part of it. A guy that just didn't break things down in the fashion we kind of hear a lot from these coaches. Finally, going back to Kirk's press conference, not a ton. We talked about Keegan Johnson. He's going to be out again this week. It's going to be touch and go with him throughout the course of the season. People have not exactly said out loud, but there's been murmurs out there that could be done for him this season, which would be devastating to this wide receiver group. I mean, he is the big time playmaker that they had. Brody Breck, can he add a little bit? I think so. I think that's a guy that can give you something. If he can get you a couple of big plays, a big play every other week, something like that, that's going to help out a lot. You know what Nico can do in the tight ends, but overall, that is something that is devastating for this wide receiver group. We found that up. Also mentioned Justin Jacobs. So mostly more injury news. Is also great to hear that they're going to be honoring the 2002 team. My buddy Will Lack, he was on that team. He was a backup offensive lineman. Speaking of transcripts and press conferences, if you've heard Kirk talk throughout the years, he's mentioned Will a couple of different times after he finished up at Iowa. He went to medical school, not at the University of Iowa, went to Harvard. Yeah, not bad for a guy from Osage that used to carrying kegs into our parties at our houses in Iowa City. But, it's great that they're going to be honored. They're going to be there. Thinking of that offensive line, what they were able to do, the five guys going off in the finale of the regular season at Kinnick Stadium, the second to last game of the year, with the five seniors hands together. Sobieski, a guy that wasn't even a full-time starter, he was drafted in the NFL. David Porter, Bruce Nelson, Eric Steinbach. This was an outstanding offensive line, and of course, a great team with Brad Banks and company, and Fred Russell and Jermel Lewis, and what a fun season that was. That was my first true road trip. I've been up to Minnesota and Wisconsin for games before. I also had family there, but went out to Michigan with a group of buddies from college. We went there, took an old school bus out there. It was a great time, a great season, culminating obviously in the Orange Bowl, and it's going to be great to see them have recognition. And of course, it makes me feel old too, as that was 20 years ago. Maybe makes you feel a little bit old as well. That's coming up this weekend. Hey, let's hope it's just like 2002. 34-9, we would take that in a heartbeat. No doubt if Iowa can pull it off. Hey, let's just get a victory. And it looks like if they're going to do that, it's going to have to be in a different fashion than the 2002 team. Had a fun one today. We'll be back with you one more time this week, getting ready for the Michigan game. We'll break things down a little bit deeper. We're not going to go extreme. How Iowa can pull the upset, how they're going to get blown out. We'll play things down the middle. We'll break down those matchups a little bit more. Coming up on tomorrow's podcast, we will also give you some picks for the week, brought to you by BetOnline. That's all coming your way tomorrow. Thanks again for being with us here with the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. And hey, Big Ten season is here. All 14 teams in action, all against each other this week. 7 conference games. Mentioned Illinois, Wisconsin a little bit earlier. There's a lot of intriguing games out there. And of course, you can catch it all with Locked On Big Ten. Nate Dickinson takes you around the Big Ten in 30 minutes each and every day. Make Locked On Big Ten your second listen each and every day. I'm Trent Condon, back with you tomorrow. Thanks for joining us here on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Go Hawks!